Good morning, Sonia. How you doing? You well?
I'm fine. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, man, lovely to meet you too. You're representing Great Britain at the 59th. I won't go with the fancy title that's in front of me, but it's the Biennale di Venezia. Is that right? Have I got it right?
Yeah, the Venice Biennale. It's the art Biennale. I mean, they have an architecture Biennale in alternate years. So last year it was the architecture Biennale, and this year it's the art Biennale.
You're presenting what I'm told is your most ambitious solo project today. I know you must be excited. Tell me all about it, please.
Sure. So, I am representing Britain, or so-called Great Britain, in the National Pavilion. And the National Pavilion in the Biennale, there's a place called the Giardini, which is the gardens, and that's where the Venice Biennale began over 100 years ago. And it's populated by different countries have their own pavilion, their own gallery, and the British Pavilion has got 6 galleries, and so I am filling those 6 galleries with my solo exhibition. And the solo exhibition is called Feeling Her Way.
What was the premise behind the name, and what's the overriding theme? What can people expect?
So the premise behind the name itself, a lot of the work that I do and have been doing for a good 20 odd years. I've been an artist for nearly 40 years. And the work that I've been doing for the last 20 odd years has asked people, mainly performers, to improvise, to go into a particular situation. I'll set up a very particular situation, a space where everyone can come, and then there's no script, there's no one knows what's going to happen, and the idea is that performers will improvise, and sometimes there's audiences there that are encouraged to take part. Not with this show, but that's so. The Feeling Her Way is literally, you don't know what's going to happen. You're going on a hopefully brave journey to just explore things and see what will happen. So yeah, it's to do with not really knowing what's ahead, but just kind of trying and seeing where things go.
Now, I know it's not your first rodeo in terms of being connected to this exhibition, this big, massive exhibition. You were involved in 2015, right? But just in terms of being chosen to represent GB, when you got that nod, when you got the call, when you got the confirmation, what was that feeling like? Especially as you've been in the game for so long, right?
I have been in the game for quite a long time, and I got a phone call in December 2019, so quite a while ago, and this show was meant to have happened in 2021, but COVID and all those things. But my very, very first response was to cry. I just burst out crying, thinking, what's going on? Because they hadn't, I hadn't applied for it. I didn't even know that they were looking at my work. And I suppose when I was able to kind of recompose myself, I, realised that my peers had put me forward. So curators, gallery directors I was unaware that they'd even been looking at the work in that sense, because I've been to the Biennale many, many times particularly to see what was on at the British Pavilion, and I've always gone just to see the work. I've never gone there to look at the space, to think of myself in that space. So I was just suddenly really overwhelmed with what an honour it is actually to have been chosen by my peers, those who look at work, all the time, to even, recognise me this way. And then, of course, I then got incredibly excited, and then I got incredibly worried. Lots and lots of emotions.
I can so imagine. You've, like you said, been here for a long time. You're one of the youngest artists of your generation to have your work acquired by the Tate. I hasten to use the phrase many moons ago, but it was, and it was at a time when I'd imagine the respect and attitude towards artists of colour in this country wasn't the same as the landscape presents itself today. I really want you, as succinctly as you can, to kind of give us a snapshot of that journey. You know, how do you find yourself at the point you are in 2022? Where does it begin for you? Where does that spark of, you know, I'm going to be an artist begin?
So I when I was at school, at the tender age of 15, my art teacher at school, Mrs. Franklin, said, I think you need to go to art school, because I was always drawing, always drawing. You know, it's something that, you know, like my brother and we were, in my household, we were always making things and doing that kind of stuff, but no one ever paid any mind to it. It wasn't considered a thing that you would consider taking seriously. So I was always drawing, and Mrs. Franklin said, well, I think you need to go to art school, and I didn't know what that was. And so she wrote my mum a letter saying, I think your daughter should go to the art school at East Town, because we grew up in East London. And my mum was like, oh, okay. So at the tender age of 15, I started doing knife drawing. And knife drawing, so I was going from school, I was going one day a week to art school. So I'm now 60. So basically I've been doing art as a thing for 45 years. And it was really funny going to art school at that point, because I'd never heard of knife drawing. I didn't know there were such things as art schools. And in knife drawing, basically you're drawing someone who's completely naked. There's a group of people who sit around, and there's someone who's standing there completely naked. And I walked in and I just thought, oh my goodness, what's this? What's going on? And then, you know, knife drawing tutor Arthur then said, well, you need to go and do a foundation. Just go up the next floor above at East Ham. And I then did foundation and just got completely involved in doing art, like from that point on. Now, is your connection still there? Your connection's still there. So yeah, you know, I got into it really at a very young age. Went to a place called Stourbridge in the West Midlands, not far from Birmingham, between Birmingham and Wolverhampton. And it was a revelation going to art school. This was end of the 1970s into the early 80s, so quite a while ago. And while I was a student, there was two things happened. There was a poster in the library that said there's an exhibition about black art, and I thought, oh, what's that? I've never heard of at this stage. What's black art? And I went to see the show. It was in Wolverhampton, and there were these I could tell they were really young artists that were talking about growing up in Britain and some of the struggles that, you know, they felt were really, really relevant, particularly to do with things like the police and harassment and kind of racism. And I was incredibly excited by this exhibition. I'd never seen anything like it. And then the next year there was a conference at Wolverhampton Art School, which was the first national convention of black artists. Now, up until that point, up until seeing that exhibition, I didn't know there was such a thing as black artists, because very little in my art education even suggested that there were. And then going to the conference, you know, going into the conference room, and there were like 200, there must be 200 black artists in this conference from all over the country. And I had no idea. I literally had no idea that this was, you know, how did I not know? One, where have all these people been? And I just got very enthused by the conversations we were having, and, you know, there's lots of exchanging of, oh, you know, get in contact with, you know, what always happens at conferences where you kind of network. And so I then started to exhibit with some of these particularly young artists, what became later known as kind of black art movement. And so I was, at that point, I'd actually, at art school, they were going to throw me out because they didn't like the work that I was doing. They couldn't quite handle what I was doing. And
which was what? Sorry, go on. Sorry, I hate to get involved, but
sure. Well, it was, you know, when I was, this was late 70s, early 80s, I was trying to figure out, or trying to understand better, images of Black women in the media, so through magazines, Ebony being one of them. You know, there weren't that many at that point, magazines of that kind of African diasporic people. And so I was trying to understand the images of Black women in the media and making these collages, and the art school just wasn't, they weren't geared up for that subject matter. And so going to the conference was really built my confidence in terms of, I kind of just decided, well, I don't really care if I fail. I don't care if they like it or they don't like it. I kind of felt I was suddenly part of something much bigger than the art school that I was at. And so it was a real game changer for me to not only go to that conference, but then to hang out and be part of what was a growing scene. And, you know, we're still benefiting actually from what emerged during the 80s, because it was happening in visual arts, but it was also happening in theatre, it was happening in music, it was happening in film, it was happening amongst writers, and people were kind of meeting and really gaining a lot of energy. And of course, you know, when I, after I'd left art school and moved back to London, you know, there were lots of conversations with the Voice newspaper, you know, because everybody was going to everything and everybody knew everybody. And it was a kind of growing sense of just being energized about what people were making, what they were thinking about, the kind of collective conversations. And that's what I was very much part of, was these kind of collective conversations about what's possible and ideas, some of the ideas coming from being influenced also by what was going on in America, but also what was going on in the Caribbean. So there was a lot, you know, it felt very active and very just do it yourself. You just get up, you meet up with other people and you make things happen. You put on a show, you're not really asking something, you're just, I mean, this is also to do with being young, but you just, you know, this is what I want, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it with these group of people. So would you say a lot of your walk, your journey has been a case of self-determination, you know, actually really being comfortable with self-validation, that growth, that internal growth then being expressed externally, and your art evolving as a part of that? Would that be? I mean, I'm very much of that thinking. I remember Professor Stuart Hall, once talking about the 1970s, and when I was a teenager in the 70s, and he made this comment that actually for young Black people who were kind of growing up in the UK at that point, the option was either to assimilate within British culture or to choose the route that was identified as kind of Rastafarianism, for instance, which was much more towards self-determination and awareness, well, a historical awareness, as well as a kind of cultural awareness that was very much about self-determination. Now, I'm not a Rasta, but very much being drawn. Yeah, I can see, but I can, you know, that sense of being drawn to, given what the options were, what the widespread options were, which was very much about self-denial, actually, or having to grapple with this kind of distorted imagery that was in mainstream and popular culture, that there could be these alternatives, that there could be a way of looking to oneself and looking back historically, and not necessarily accepting, one could say, predetermined definitions of oneself.
Your work is recently featured in Tate Britain's Life Between Islands, which has gone down an absolute storm. I think it's fantastic. what were your thoughts on that exhibit? And just, you know, you kind of touched on your journey slightly. You know, I'm sure we could be here all day if we really wanted to dig down deep, or at least do a series of interviews, which we may do, you know, if you're up for. But what was your thoughts on that exhibit in 2022, given what we've been through over the last couple of years, and just in terms of the industry, where do you think we are, insofar as how our work by Black artists exhibiting the Black narrative is embraced? Because it seems in stark contrast to the experience you had with you trying to get across whatever it was when you were drawing those figures at Ebony and in that period. Talk about the chasm and how things have changed.
So, I mean, Life Between Islands, I think, and many people, I think, would agree, is and has been a beautiful exhibition. It's a historical exhibition that looks back. Actually, some of the earliest work goes back to the 1930s with Ronald Moody's Yohannan, to the present day. And for me, talks about a kind of transatlantic dialogue through art, and experiences of those who come from the Caribbean to the UK, but also those from the UK that have also been influenced by the Caribbean, and that dialogue historically for over 70, 80 years. And so, you know, an exhibition that is just so rich with works that many of which are in public collections in the UK, of the ways in which, here I'm going to speak mainly about African and Caribbean artists, have influenced the cultural landscape of the UK and not fully being recognised within that. And this is an ongoing discussion it hasn't begun with Life Between Islands, but by any means, but it's really important for us to be able to see the breadth and depth and richness and beauty of, and also, you know, the challenging, you know, there's a lot of photographic work in that exhibition that speaks of a kind of resilience, you could say, that the Black community has endured, which we're all very, very familiar with. And for me, that exhibition, it crisscrosses between the kind of factual and the imagination. You know, it's not one kind of exhibition. It moves between artists who imagine and artists who show realities. And that it's that mix for me that was just was really inspiring. And I was deeply proud to be part of it and to be in that show. And I mean, you will know that that show was curated, researched and curated by my partner David A. Bailey, who has, we've both kind of been around for quite a long time. But it was the richness of the research, and of course that work needs to have a really well-established infrastructure like the Tate in order to show that work in all its glory. Now, my own understanding of at least the last 40 years has been that the mainstream galleries have shown works of, I mean, not as comprehensively as that show. I mean, the only other equivalent was an exhibition that was in 1989 that had been curated by Rashid Areen called The Other Story, Afro-Asian Art in Post-War Britain, and about a hidden history and how those works do go into those major spaces, but also how they quickly become hidden as they go up and then they get hidden. And there's a kind of cycle of what I call cultural amnesia that has happened historically within the UK in terms of the the contributions, the impact, the stories of artists of colour, let's use that term, artists of colour, since the beginning of the 20th century, not just in terms of the Windrush post-war moment. It's a narrative we like to really re-rehearse and regurgitate, but actually there's a longer history, at least to the beginning of the 20th century, and artists of colour, artists of African descent, who have been central and involved in the story of modern and contemporary art. But there's these constant ways where it appears and then it disappears for a long time, and someone has to come back and bring it out into the open yet again.
That culture amnesia that you refer to, I believe, is I guess the negative is what it is, but the positive is it presents opportunity to delve deeper and actually bring forth some of these works that haven't been exposed, that do fill in the gaps on the narrative or help to understand culturally where with our journey with a bit more refinement.
But one of the issues that comes around with that cycle of systemic amnesia is that the generation that then comes through, the next generation that is then trying to come through, thinks that they've invented the wheel, because that historical trail, they need those historical trails to not be thinking, oh, I'm the first, and that sets up all kinds of problems. I will say they're problems if you're constantly thinking you're the first to have done something without the knowledge that actually 20, 30 years ago there were other firsts, and 20, 30 years before that there were other firsts.
Maybe that's where the responsibility lies. Maybe that's something that needs to be done. Those significant interactions and coming togethers with mainstream and, let's call it, alternative or not so mainstream culture, need to be documented so that these people, the next generation, don't think they're doing it first. Actually, let's elevate what's being delivered now. And like I said, refine it so it tells a story in greater detail. Back to your impending exhibition. I noticed that it's in collaboration with others, song, movement in relation to the past and the present. So got me thinking, the question I always like to ask, what was the most enjoyable part of pulling it all together? Do you have a favourite element? Are you willing to share that with us? I'm sure all of it's enjoyable, but I'm sure there must be parts that you wish, I'm glad that's done. And there was other parts where you're thinking, can't wait to see how that's received. So,
to full disclosure about the work that's going to be in the British Pavilion. So I've been doing a project that's began in 1999, so it's been going now for 23 years, and it's called the Devotional Project. And the Devotional Project began in Liverpool, part of a project, part of an organisation called FACT, which is the Foundation for Art and Creative Technology. Before they had a building, they've now got a building, and they're an arts centre now. And before they got a building, they were doing off-site projects where they were bringing artists in to work with specific communities. And I was partnered with Liverpool Black Sisters in Topsfield. And what I wanted us as a group to do was to kind of do a little bit of historical work on Black British female singers. And in our very first session, we were all kind of gathered in a kind of semicircle, and I said, "Well, can someone kick us off? Think about a Black British female singer that you remember, that you've grown up with." And it took us about 10 minutes before anyone could think of anyone. And most of the names that first came up were all American. And people were, people were quite embarrassed, actually, that they couldn't think of a particular British-based black singer. And then eventually someone mentioned Shirley Bassey, and we all got up and sang Big Spender, and then in a way that was what kind of ushered in the project. And then afterwards, it was meant to be a 6-month project. And what then happened was, sorry, I'm going to go on a long journey. So
no, I want to hear it. So I actually sat up to get more into the story. So yeah, go for it.
So what then happened, which was not anticipated and wasn't planned, was that I think because the group kind of felt so troubled that it had taken them so long to remember anyone, they then went and asked family members, friends, work colleagues, can you think of anybody? And so by the end of the 6-month project, we gathered 46 names. Did a small exhibition, and then the project ended. But what then happened was that somehow this gathering names kind of took on a life of its own. So people would then kind of start sending me through people who had been in the project. They would, friends of friends of friends would send messages back to me and said, oh, have you got such and such on your list? Have you got such and such? So I now have about 350, and it's still growing, names that date back to the middle of the 19th century to the present. And so I've done a number of works that I've kind of got a collection. People then started to bring me material like vinyl records and cassettes and all kinds of stuff. Whenever I do like a public talk, people would come and carry a bag and say, oh, you know, I've heard about your project, and you know, do you want this stuff which has been in my attic? So it's a collection that keeps going in and out of order because it's always growing, and I'm not always on top of it as a kind of actually archiving it all. But this has been the basis of several projects that I've been doing. Mm. So I'm now getting to the Venice Biennale. So when the invitation came, I kind of thought, well, maybe I'd dive back into the Devotional Project. And because I've been doing lots of different things with material, I kind of thought, well, it would be really great to work with some singers. So I then approached a number of singers. And 3 of the singers are based in the UK. One composer called Erin Wallen. She's really, really interesting. I've been wanting to meet Erin for a really long time. She's kind of classical stroke spiritual composer. And one performer who works in a very experimental way, who's from, I'm going to forget, she's from Stockholm, Sweden, who I've been trying to work with for a long, long time. Very, very experimental vocalist. And so what then happened was I reached out to these performers and said, I don't really know what's going to happen. Will you be prepared to meet and improvise? And by this point, I booked Abbey Road Studios, and so we had a session at Abbey Road Studios. So the other singers are Poppy Ajuda, Jackie Dankworth, and Tanita Tikaram, as well as Sophia Jernberg. So just a little bit of information about Poppy is the youngest and she sings very much in that kind of R&B soulful voice. I mean, they're all very soulful voice. Jackie Dankworth is the daughter of John Dankworth and Cleo Lane. And so anyone who knows about, British jazz from the 50s onwards will know Cleo Lane and John Dankworth were almost like the king and queen of the kind of radical free jazz movement in the 50s in Britain. Tanisha Tikaram was a pop star, which emerged as a pop star in the late 1980s. Sophia Joenberg, as I said, she's originally was born in Ethiopia, but then her family moved to Vietnam, and then they moved to Sweden, but she's grown up in Sweden, but she works in Norway. So I have to also add that many of the performers that are in the devotional collection have connections to multiple places in the world, but they made their careers and have lived in the UK. So they've very much contributed to the soundscape that we're all familiar with. And we met at Abbey Road Studios, and through the grace of Erin Wallen, she managed to kind of guide the performers through this process of improvisation, where she just kind of takes them on the journey. And I gave no instructions, they could just do what they wanted. And then afterwards, they each did a solo piece. So much of the exhibition consists of the improvised work that was done, and then the artists then have solo spaces, and then in the back gallery, gallery 4, there is a collection of memorabilia from the Devotional Project.
Sounds comprehensive. I can't wait. It ends on November the 27th, right?
Yeah.
Are you secretly hoping for an extension, Sonia?
No, because that's no. That's what happens with Venice. I mean, April through to November, it's really
it's a
long time for an exhibition.
Yeah. It's a long run. It's a long run. Well, look, congratulations on landing it, representing and being able to deliver and blazing the trail still. I go for it.
I was going to say that it wasn't able to happen, but they are amazing. They are absolutely amazing, the singers. One of the people who I really wanted to be in the project, but because of COVID created so much havoc in terms of trying to get people together, get people from one country to another country. And one of the people that I couldn't believe I was talking to was P.P. Arnold. Now, P.P. Arnold, I don't know if you know who P.P. Arnold is. She came to the UK in the 1960s as a backing singer with Ike and Tina Turner, and she stayed. One of her 60s tracks was Just Call Me Angel of the Morning, which was a massive hit in the 60s. P.P. Arnold is the voice of Britpop, because she has that Northern Soul voice. She has performed with everybody, from the Stones. Last year, she had done a collaboration with Paul Weller. She has sung with everybody, and she literally is the voice that became known as the kind of 60s British pop rock sound. And she's amazing. I mean, she is so amazing. So I got to have a Zoom conversation with P.P. Arnold, and I'm sitting there and I'm pitching, and she was just really, really generous, really open, really positive. She's in her 80s. She's still making music. She lives in Spain, but she's always here in the UK because her children are here. But that was like, I'm like, I can't believe I'm talking to P.P. Arnold. It was, you know, it's like, I'm talking to her and I was crying and laughing at the same time, thinking, it's just amazing. And she really wanted to be part of it, but we just couldn't make the travel.
COVID is a huge disrupt. That's
COVID.
a shame. It's a real shame.
But legend. I can't even, you know, such a legend.
Well, for the younger ones watching, go and do your research, P.P. Arnold. And also do your research on Sonia as well. You know, she's, like I said earlier, we haven't got the time to really dig down deep into it. I mean, you're a recipient of an OBE that speaks in itself. I know what the letters stand for, but for me, I kind of redefined it as our best ever. And you're definitely one of those, Sonia. So, I mean, is there anything else you want to leave us with before we part ways?
I suppose one of the things that's something that I now feel really passionate about is just do your thing. Just do your thing.